engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention. This is episode 132, and Pure Reinvention is where we create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. We're fortunate today to be able to pull our master technological guy, Will Carlson, from behind the computer. Will is an exceptional individual who's done magnificent work for Pure Reinvention. He has a background as an association executive, but more importantly, he's really been a lot of the fuel that's helped push Pure Reinvention into where we can proudly say we are at episode 132. So, Will, thanks for that. Welcome to being on the microphone.
Well, thanks. It's a different opportunity to be in front of it rather than behind and producing it.
Will, in particular, you had mentioned that Simplify was, interestingly enough, after 132 guests or thereabout, rarely did somebody suggest that Simplify was one of the 5 steps that they most closely associated with. And I found that very interesting because it's maybe one of the most important that is a part of the 5 steps. And you had mentioned specifically that it was very helpful for you.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you remember, but whenever you quizzed me in the early days, I would always forget Simplify and the 5 steps. And it's funny. And there's some examples. First of all, complete disclosure of all the Pure Reinvention team, I'm probably the lowest common denominator on this, especially, Simplify. I get passionate about something. You mentioned that last week too, is, when you get passionate, you like to throw out tons of information. Yep. And I do that. And often, I would do that to the Pure Reinvention team, and the smart ones would ignore the message. And then you would typically reply back, what the hell does this mean? Right. In the way you do it. And I had to learn a couple times that, wait a moment, maybe my passion, I need to sit back and take a step back and kind of condense it. And actually, there were 1 or 2 times where I did that and went, hey, maybe I didn't understand this quite as much as I thought I did.
Right. That's interesting. As you slowed it down and you really kind of thought through kind of the more specific implementation, you found maybe gaps or places that needed to be filled in.
Absolutely. There was an aspect of it that really sparked the excitement, but then wait a minute, I have to think this through a little bit.
Right.
And the simplified process is really vital in doing that.
That's an interesting observation. When you ask somebody, so here's where I kind of began to understand the importance of Simplify. Somebody once told me, if you have to give an hour-long speech, that's really easy to do. But if you have to condense that speech down into 10 minutes and really have a message, that's really difficult. And I began to really kind of take that to heart and try to understand what that really meant. And with an hour speech, you can just put a lot of filler in, right? But people walk away and they're not quite sure what you said. Whereas in a 10-minute speech, you have to be very, very thoughtful about the bullet points that you really want your audience to leave and understand whatever message you were trying to communicate. And I think that became a lot of my understanding that now you're beginning to communicate that I have so much to say, let me say it. But when you get all done, people might look at it and go, what did he say? Because there were a lot of words and there was a lot of passion. There was no confusion about that. The confusion was, so what am I supposed to do with this? The confusion was, what is the take home for me as a listener? What is it that I'm supposed to be learning from this? And I think that becomes the really interesting part of Simplify, Will, is can we move our own passion and knowledge to a takeaway message for the listener? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And as we discover this month, our next 2 interviews coming up, really discuss that and developing branding and messaging and taking all the best solutions typically are very simple solutions to very complex problems. Mm-hmm. But you have to completely understand that complex problem in order to come up with that simple solution. A long speech is basically a stream of consciousness.
Right.
It often takes me more hours to produce a 30-second commercial than it does to do an hour talking head.
Right. More thoughtful.
Absolutely. You have to take the main thoughts, the most important cogent thoughts out of that and stream it down into the main point. You have to understand your audience and what they're going to take away, what they find value in, as well as all the complex parts that you're pulling from. And so that really makes it a very long and difficult process, but necessary if you want to be successful.
It requires the communicator, the builder, to focus on the understanding that the listener has and then adjusting the message to their ability to comprehend and listen and take in whatever it is.
This week's episode is sponsored by MB Strategies. MB Strategies focuses on your success and provides you with sustainable results by identifying opportunities, guiding you through implementation, and navigating you to greater results. Contact MB Strategies today at mbstrategiesllc.com to start your reinvention journey.
So let me give you another example. I was fortunate a number of years ago to build the house that we live in. And I would have told you at the beginning of that building a house was one of the most overwhelming things that I had ever thought about, because it just seemed, how could all of the intricacies of what needed to come together, how could one person ever understand how to do that? And then I watched the process. And then it became very interesting for me to understand that you brought in different people to do different things. And so you start with the surveyor coming in, right? And they locate where the house is going to sit. And then the next thing is the guy with the big steam shovel shows up to dig the basement. And then the next thing is, and so the next thing was, then they pour the walls, right? Then they put the deck down and they start to build the walls and frame it in. But what you began to understand is that they weren't focusing on the end of the house. They understood what that vision was, right? They had those plans, but what they did was they simplified it. They reduced it down so each individual worked on their part. And therefore, it's not complicated at all, because the survey person understands clearly how to survey and how to stake out exactly where that house belongs. Or the person that's digging the basement, right, knew exactly how to do that. And so, to me, Simplify became so incredibly important, because we get so overwhelmed with the complexities of the world, of our relationship, of our life, that at the end of the day, if you don't kind of think through what did I do today? What's the one thing I got done? Or on this project I'm working on, did I do one thing to move it forward? Really kind of simplify things. It became more than what I could handle.
Oh, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times in my professional career where I've been put or have something thrown in front of me where it's just absolutely overwhelming. And I had to break it down to simple individual parts and then check off those simple, that gave me the motivation to endure and go on, is by breaking it into small pieces. And it also helped me to understand the project is by breaking it all in those pieces and then paying attention to individual pieces when the appropriate time came. Otherwise, you just get paralyzed.
What's really interesting about that, and I've got to tell you, this is something I learned or started understanding in the 7th grade. So in the 7th grade, I struggled with story problems, which I would guess a lot of people do, right? When you say story problems, the hair on your back, your neck rises, and it's like I swore I would never have to solve another one of those, except that's exactly what life is all about. I was struggling, trying to figure it out, and finally, my dad came up to help me, and he said, you might find it helpful if you draw a picture of what you're really trying to do. And he said that picture might help you understand then how to solve the problem. And I thought, wow. At the time I didn't understand just how incredibly important those words were going to be. But as I am now understanding a number of years later, that's exactly what Judge Rosen did to help solve what he was working on in something as big as the story problem in the city of Detroit. Mm-hmm. And for key leaders who are responsible for moving their story forward, right, that problem or that opportunity has to be reduced to a very simple understanding, a very simple set of expectations or awarenesses that everybody can relate to, that then they can build their solution around. And so breaking down that story problem into a picture, or in your case, Will, as you were saying, into that more simplified understanding, not only helps others, but as I just learned, it really helps the person who is telling the story.
Oh, absolutely. And you kind of, in terms of messaging, and we'll talk about this more in the coming month, branding, and how really that branding is simply a process of breaking a very complex issue or breaking down what you do into a very simple bite-sized form. But also, as we learn, or are going to learn, that brand is much more than like a logo or a simple statement. You have to execute and create a culture around that brand in that execution in order to make it effective. And so it'll be interesting to explore that in the next few weeks.
And in most cases, the simpler, the better.
Absolutely.
So if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.